Well, thank you, Ms. Niebler, Ms. Corolla, and indeed thank you to all the members for the opportunity to speak here today. I understand the privilege it is to address this chamber, and I appreciate the opportunity. I would, of course, also like to thank you as a consumer for the work done on the previous roaming initiatives. I am a beneficiary of that work, as are all European citizens. However, I believe that Ms. Vice President Cruz has done us all a service by setting the ambitious targets of moving to the elimination of roaming charges by 2015. If nothing else, it has forced us all to re-examine the approach to how we regulate roaming. I would like to make just 3 points in the time that has been allotted. The first point I'd like to make is that I believe that there is a structural problem at the wholesale level, where we see multiple networks vying for what is marginal traffic, any one of whom can supply the whole market. We tend to see very low wholesale rates evolve. That is precisely what we see in the context of national roaming. So why don't we see this in international roaming? I believe that the problem that exists is a question of balancing between inbound and outbound traffic. Indeed, the reason that I'm here today is that I wrote a series of papers in 2010 where I identified traffic balancing as the key part of the problem. And I believe that this has largely been accepted by both the Commission and BEREC. To quote page 14 of the Commission staff working paper that was referred to earlier, negotiations principally evolve around agreeing to balance traffic and then to apply a marginal rate to the remainder of the traffic. It goes on to say, whereas the negotiated price for unbalanced traffic can thus in some instances be as much as 40% less than the regulated cap, this is not as such shown in the statistics, since the relatively small amount of balanced minutes is mixed in with a high volume of expensive balanced minutes. BEREC, in its report at paragraph 8, referring to the same phenomenon, says, in effect, it is only the residual traffic which is subject to strong competition. The implication is that smaller operators who have a big incentive to win wholesale traffic and who can offer low prices are essentially foreclosed from the market. Mrs. Niebler, you asked at the start how we can create competition in this market, and you referred, interestingly, to the airline sector. And I would, you'll know it already, but I would remind you of the German case, Ahmed Said, which, in a sense, cut the Gordian knot in the airline sector by forbidding route pairs between the big airline carriers. I believe there's a similar opportunity in the roaming markets. Anyway, in the papers, I proposed to stop that balancing of traffic, but it was adjudged too difficult or impractical to achieve. So let's put that to one side for the moment. Wholesale markets are often not capable of supporting self-sustaining competitive outcomes. We need only think of LLU in a fixed context or MTRs in a mobile context. However, when they are not competitive or self-sustainingly competitive, regulation seeks to put in place prices which approach the competitive outcome, thus protecting consumers, assuming that there is sufficient retail competition to see those wholesale prices pass through to end users. I believe BEREC have done heroic work on estimating costs in the roaming area, but it must be stressed with, I believe, very limited data. They have also themselves said that the results are very conservative. I believe that the cost ranges identified overstate the actual wholesale costs. I think that overstatement is greatest in the area of data and roaming data. We already have a number of operators offering wholesale rates of between 1 and 5 euro cents per megabyte. So a client of mine, Play in Poland, an entrant, offers today wholesale 1 euro cent per megabyte, or 10 euros per gigabyte, open to the market on a reciprocal basis. Are people rushing in to take this great rate? No, they're not, because of this, I believe, this balancing problem. But I'm also aware that there are a number of agreements with different operators at 5 cents per megabyte, which are in place. And I see some of those operators here today. I think to speak of rates which are multiples of those rates in the market is inappropriate. With respect to voice and SMS, I think, Mrs. Niebler, you are quite close to something which approaches cost. But I think we can even lower them further and still remain within BEREC's cost ranges. If wholesale rates do approach cost, then it should be offered, I believe, to offer pan-EU retail, make pan-EU retail offers. That was the original target that was set, and I think it is one which is achievable within certain limits. If I look at the US market, for instance, Pan-American offers are bounded. They are not limitless. There is no operator in the US which has a Pan-American network. Every one of them uses roaming services to a greater or lesser extent, and certainly the other network operators beyond the Big Four do to a greater extent. Those Big Four operators in North America have contractual limitations which say if you perpetually roam off your host network, then your contract will be cut. So I don't think it's appropriate to seek to have unlimited pan-EU offers, but I think we should have pan-EU offers up to some limit, but only if we can get the wholesale prices at an appropriate level. So my second point is that unlike the wholesale level, where we only have one solution proposed, which is the price caps, we have two competing solutions proposed at the retail level, which are, of course, the price caps and the structural measures. To be clear, the structural measures that are proposed only propose to pass the wholesale caps through to the retail level without ongoing regulation. There is an important balance to be struck, I believe, between setting very low retail rates, which will limit the scope of entry, as the gentleman from Transitel pointed out, and against setting very high retail rates, which may act as a price target in the market for operators to sit up against. I think that sufficient space has to be left between the wholesale rate and the retail rate to allow entry. And if we can do that, I believe that entrants will flood in and that we will see a competitive pass-through to the end customer. Higher retail price caps are appropriate to ensure sufficient competitive space for the structural measures to work, so that retail regulation can be withdrawn, as has been proposed by the Commission. If competition does not evolve, either amongst existing operators or in foot of new entry, it is possible to reintroduce or lower the retail caps after 2016. And I suspect if that were to come to pass, that this House would not be very gentle in terms of setting the price caps beyond that date. I believe that given the limited ambition of the structural measures, which are simply to pass through the wholesale price reductions to the retail levels, that the speed and cost of implementation are important considerations. And therefore, I believe the single IMSI solution is the best match to those criteria. My final short point is simply to say that I think we can achieve the target of pan-EU offers up to some limited point if we get the wholesale prices right. And I think that this should be the trigger for loosening of regulation in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. That brings us on to the next